I have just arrived in Budapest and I'm walking alone in the street to the restaurant where we will eat together tonight. We is dozens of journalists from Ukraine. So they traveled from Kiev to Budapest by train. We came from all corners of the EU and of Europe actually. And we are now gathering so they can meet with dozens of journalists from Budapest. And then our journey ends in Madrid, Spain. So you're gonna hear a bunch of Ukrainian colleagues who are they waiting for me? Not waiting for me, I hope they've started already, but they are in a restaurant and I'm gonna eat as well when I'm there. And you're gonna hear them and listen to their stories and to the feelings, the emotions and the observations they make here. Because it's not always easy to understand how people see you from outside.
Hello, dear listeners. I will even say привіт. As you can hear yourself, I am not Sarah Lu. My name is Antonina Rybka. I am your hostess for the next episodes and project manager of the Europe-Ukraine desk, which showcases this podcast. In this episode, as Sarah Lu has said, we invite you on a trip with a dozen of Ukrainian journalists who toured the biggest newsrooms of Hungary, Italy, Bulgaria, France, Germany and Spain. Ukrainian fellows met with international colleagues in key cities, but for this episode, we will concentrate on the three capitals we visited: Budapest, Rome and Madrid. This episode is the first in a series of 4, where we invite you to listen to Ukrainian journalists talk about their work and the coverage of Ukraine in foreign media. This episode starts on a journey. After a tough 24-hour train ride with extra hours waiting at the border to enter the EU, our Ukrainian fellows arrived Hungary in the capital of Hungary.
It looked like a soup, like normal soup which I used to have, that would probably contain some mushrooms and cheese and something like that, but turned out to be a smoothie in a plate. I probably can taste some bananas and pineapple there. Very unusual experience. We're starting the meal with something sweet. That's very original.
Our first meal may have started with something sugary, but our trip wasn't so sweet. We met with some Hungarian media outlets, the online Telex, the weekly Magyar Hang, RTL TV and the weekly HVG. All of them are independent newsrooms. And it was a shock for many of us to realize how the conditions for independent journalists are hard and grueling in Hungary nowadays. To grasp the context better, we were welcomed and briefed by Cornelia, our media network manager for Hungary, and a Hungarian journalist herself. Cornelia explained the historical background that has led to the current situation.
As Hungary regained its independence after 40 years of Soviet occupation, it wasn't official communism, it was socialism, but it was a dictatorship, of course, and under Soviet occupation. So the army was here. As the last Russian soldier left 1991, it was a very important day of the 20th century history of Hungary. Until 2010, as after 8 years of not very successful socialist governments, the government party Fidesz won 2/3 majority in the parliament 2010 and started to restructure the state institutions and the media landscape too.
And this is where we are today, after more than a decade under Viktor Orban's iron-handed leadership.
I know that some of you expressed your wish that you would like to hear pro-governmental voices here in Hungary, you are interested in, but that would have been very hard, to be honest, because these opinion bubbles are very closed and there is less communication between them. and it could have led to conflicts too, and we didn't want that. And of course, the government-controlled media often spread Russian narratives, which is very weird and I think exceptional in Europe. So I think there's no other country where public media and government-controlled media would be opened for Russian narratives so much. The government praised very much media outlets, private companies. They are still private media companies officially, but they are government mouthpieces now, and the public media, of course, too. More traditional newspapers were shut down. The real reason was always political and not economical.
This truth was frustrating, as you can hear from our colleague Serhiy, a host on Ukrainian public radio.
Maybe a little bit pity that we will not face for governmental and government-controlled media, because it would be great to hear some narratives from their point of view and to discuss with them.
To understand how Hungary's media landscape has shrunk over time, Cornelia organized a meeting with Peter Greco, a senior political scientist and disinformation expert. He explained Russian influence in Hungary to us.
Actually, he put the statement that Orban regime could be described as spin dictatorship. It's like a new wave of dictatorships. It means that the leaders, dictators, they come into the power not with some revolutions, not with some putches, and they don't use armed forces to catch the power, but they somehow mask their dictatorship with some democracy, so-called democracy procedures like elections and so on. And by using these visible procedures, they can maintain their power through decades.
As Ukrainians, we know that Hungary is a challenging country for us, and the relationships between Ukraine and Hungary are tense. But being in Budapest, we became aware that these tensions exist within the country itself.
The trip in Hungary was interesting for me because I didn't know that in countries that in European Union can be such big problems with media marketer and media speech.
Probably the situation in Hungary got more understandable for me with how many medias are dependent on the government and how strong the control is, which I had no idea about.
I even didn't know that free press is not so free in Hungary, and laws not help. It's just the same situation that was in Ukraine maybe 10 years ago when Viktor Yanukovych was the president, but not now.
And with those comparisons and reflections, we went to a warmer place, the city of Rome.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, we very welcome you to Trollhättan Airport, where the local time is 5 minutes past 8 p.m.
At the beginning, we could not resist enjoying the sun and great food in the eternal city. After we charged our batteries with carbonara, our next professional adventure began. We received a warm welcome from Marika, media network manager for Italy at the Europe-Ukraine desk. When she gave us an overview of the Italian media landscape, it felt like we were having a déjà vu.
So Italian media system, as I was saying yesterday to some of you, is in crisis, like all other countries because of digitization, but also I think even worse. But it's not just in terms of money, but in terms of quality. Like there are not so many media that care about quality, rigor, and also language, and that question what impact their work and what consequences their work have.
That's why most of people don't trust media anymore. But I think, as I was saying yesterday, that there are some media outlets, like small one, and some journalists individually that are trying to do a different work compared to the system in general.
In Rome, we had a chance to meet investigative journalists who told us about their ongoing work on Ukraine and on Russian influence in Italy. We also visited Internazionale, a weekly newspaper that translates articles from all over the world into Italian. Also, we spent some time at the headquarters of the public broadcaster RAI, in particular RAI News. There we were greeted by a group of Italian journalists specializing in international news. They shared insights into how RAI News has been reporting on Russia's war against Ukraine since the full-scale invasion.
Julia mentioned we are an all-news channel, and so we are online 24 hours a day, and we started covering what's going on in your country since the beginning, before the beginning, because we had a correspondent already there. And I still remember the shock of that night, 21st of February. Even there were warnings.
This is Erika Tornelli, Deputy Editor-in-Chief in charge of Foreign Affairs.
I remember specifically one warning, CIA saying there will be bombing on Kiev and a massive invasion. And I asked a senior analyst of foreign policy, is it true? It's not some US hysteria. And I remember his answer, he said, yes, a little bit, because this is not going to happen. And it did happen. And I remember the shock of that night. I remember crying, and I have a lot of Ukrainian friends crying with them, because how is that possible? They're really bombing Kiev, they're really invading a sovereign country? It was true. And since that moment, we never stopped covering that issue. We have been covering constantly the conflict, the invasion and the resistance. And I can tell you that as far as Russian will be on your country, we won't stop covering it. I think it's an easy promise to make to you. And also, we have been broadcasting 3 minutes of everyday Ukrainian news at 3 p.m. We have our translators here. They're very useful. And it's not much, but it's a symbol. It's a symbol of our commitment in covering and giving information to your people who are living in it.
Not only did Ukrainian journalists learn about Italian perspectives, but engaged in international cooperation right away. Olena Removska, a presenter at Suspilne, a Ukrainian public broadcaster, was invited to go live on RAI News on that same day.
First of all, thank you very much for invitation.
Prima di tutto, grazie dell'invito, è un piacere essere qui. Dobbiamo cominciare con il dire che...
How was the visit? This was the topic of discussion on our taxi ride back.
Of course, it was very interesting because, as Italian journalists told us, it changed a lot.
And also they told us a lot about their own personal perception and about their own experience in Ukraine. Actually, for me it was like an exchange of thoughts about Ukraine, and it was as if they trying to show us how they see our country from the outside. And they were really sincere on it, actually really honest. And I felt like that really touched them. So it was interesting to know that there are people in different country, in different with their different lives, their own lives, but they still have a connection to Ukraine and to Russian-Ukrainian war.
So we went on, still digesting what we had encountered, but feeling optimistic. Our next and final stop took us to a country geographically so distant from Ukraine, Spain. To be honest, none of us were quite sure what to expect. After 2 weeks traveling across Europe, we started feeling tired. We landed in Madrid airport, and an enormous city was waiting for us. For many, it was their first time in Madrid. So how should we start? Maybe with croquetas and sangria on a rooftop? And definitely a good night's sleep. Next morning, Spain's media network manager and journalist Fermín welcomed us. Since Fermín recently has spent a long time in Ukraine as a freelance reporter, he shared with us his observations about unexpected similarities between the two countries, despite the physical distance.
Just a little introduction about Spain, because I think it's important to understand some things before visiting some newsrooms. 48 million people, a country similar to Ukraine. We came from a dictatorship. That makes a lot of things important for us for this trip. It was a far-right dictatorship, but more beyond that, the important issue here is that we were kind of close to the world during this time.
Fermín explained that after decades of protectionism under Franco's dictatorship, Spain started its transition to a more open and interconnected society, in particular through tourism and economic development. Eventually, this shift brought advantages for the media market, and since the 90s, Spanish media has had access to new audiences and possibilities to cover a wide range of international issues, from the Balkan Wars to African conflicts and beyond. This is why, Fermín explained, Spain was invested in covering Ukraine, a European war, from day one.
And it's like very far away, and some people they say, okay, what are you doing here if you are Spanish? But I say this because I feel there are a lot of similarities between Ukraine and Ukraine society and Spanish society. Even, of course, there are some differences.
Our fellows met with El País, one of the largest Spanish-speaking media outlets, and one of the most read. Covering the Russian war against Ukraine is a key challenge for them, because they are a gateway to the Spanish-speaking world. This is relevant for Central and South America, where pro-Russian narratives are very prominent in the media landscape. This is our fellow Dmitro.
I was impressed, actually, because I think we in Ukraine, at least it was in my bubble, a bit underestimate this Spanish world and how important it is, how big it is, and how actually meaningful it is. Yeah, and El País is a kind of a mirror of this world. So it's a huge media company, great newsroom, great people, and people who work with not just facts, being news company, but with context. It's very important.
Then came the last newsroom on this trip. Maybe because it was the last, or maybe only because they really impressed our fellows with their Ukraine coverage, but the visit to El Confidencial left a very positive impression. El Confidencial is a young media outlet that has been covering Ukraine for years. Trying to engage their audiences in all possible creative ways, they support their articles with data and interesting infographics, for example comparing maps of Kyiv and Madrid, in order to help their readers better understand the scale of the war.
We have so much information to think and analyze and to decide where can we be useful and what can we offer to our colleagues. So I think that this is something that we are going to do in the next few days at least, when we will be coming back home to Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think that next few days after coming to Ukraine we will be just sleep all the time after all this trip. But about El Confidencial, I really enjoyed that they just had quite a good structure of our meeting, because they first presented themselves, spoke also about our experience, and then they shared their plans for collaboration for grants program. And I think it was good because we saw that they are really interested in us, and they are also just thinking about this project as about possibility for both sides. So it was good.
And I just want to add one specific thought. It is not difficult, but it is very important to do a homework. So as for me, these guys and girls, they do their homework. They have context, they have basic understanding of what what can be some problematic issues, where these issues are not real. So for me, it is very important that people trying to understand and they ask questions and they trying to dig deeper. And for my mind, these journalists from this El Confidencial, yes, they are good in that.
Good. So we finally found a newsroom that kind of gets.
Yeah, it's always a space for improving. It's in Ukraine the same and the other parts of world and so on. But it's always about your efforts. Do you do these efforts or not? They have this intention to do better, to dig deeper and trying to understand.
So I feel myself very, very enriched, very. So it's not just insights, it's not just new contacts, not just old and new friends actually. It depends on the country. So interesting, and I think it's a kind of a summary of this trip, that when you feel yourself inspired and full of energy at the end of the trip, it means this trip was very good. This is how I feel actually right now. It's funny because it's the last day, but I feel full of energy. Yeah.
Not everyone says that.
Thank you for listening to Covering Ukraine, the Europe-Ukraine Desk podcast. This episode was the first of a series of 4, where we invite you to listen to Ukrainian journalists talk about their work and about the coverage of Ukraine in foreign media. My name is Antonina Rybka. I was your host for this episode and a project manager of the Europe-Ukraine Desk. This episode was recorded by Lepers and written together with Danilo Bilyk, who also edited, sound designed and mixed this episode. Michael Bird was our proofreader. The views expressed by the characters are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the organizations they work for, nor n-ost or the European Commission, who funded this project. The podcast was created as part of the Europe-Ukraine Desk, a program that aims at creating bridges between journalists from the EU and Ukraine. If you like the show, learned something new or are upset with something we have said, please get in touch with us at eud@n-ost.org. We love hearing from you. You will find the address in the episode description. And maybe consider telling your friends about this show if you liked it. We have more to come, so talk to you soon.